As usual, President Trump is making the world's head spin, and this weekend it was really out of control. Let's hear first what he had to say on Air Force One.
If you don't have a deal by Wednesday when the ceasefire ends, will you extend the ceasefire or will you start attacks again?
Maybe I won't extend it.
Okay.
But the blockade is going to remain. But maybe I won't extend it. So you have a blockade, and unfortunately we'll have to start dropping bombs again.
Okay, Mark. So let's get right to it. Are we extending the ceasefire, or are we dropping bombs again starting Wednesday this week? And by the way, just so our viewers should know, we are taping this episode on Sunday, April 19th.
Ruthie, we heard the president, and I'm going to say something that I don't know if you'll agree with, but I'm telling you what I think President Trump thinks. He thinks that if he says we're going to start bombing again, that will incentivize the Iranian regime to make the deal that he wants. If they don't agree, then he will start bombing again. But what is Trump's preference? And he says this over and over again, and I believe him. He says he wants a deal that actually will end once and for all the Iranian quest for a nuclear weapon, which means enriched uranium already in Iran has to be moved out, and their ability to enrich new uranium has to be ended. And they are his two fundamental red lines on the nuclear program. Up until now, the Iranians have refused to go that far. They'll play all sorts of games with words, but on the important issue of will they deliver on those issues, they've said no. So unless there's a change in Iranian behavior, you could say it looks like we're going back to war. But two open questions. And I don't have an answer to, but I just want to raise them so you and the people who follow Israel Undiplomatic can think about this. Option number one is that maybe the Iranians have been hit so hard and they don't want to go back to war that they'll finally make concessions that they haven't made up until now. I think low probability, but possible. Low probability. The other possibility is Trump said we could strike them again, and everyone thinks he's going to go back to the bombing campaign, right? And he even, I think that was the language he used. We bombed them before, we can bomb them again. But maybe, and Trump likes to do this, he will surprise them. Maybe he'll do something else. Maybe he'll do a land incursion. My favorite thing is that he'll take over the island where all the oil facilities are. And then he can offer to end the blockade because they will have nothing to send out if he takes over the oil island, yes? But I would think that if Trump does go back to military action, expect the unexpected, not just a return to the bombing campaign, not more of the same. Expect something different.
Okay, no, I don't disagree with you about Trump preferring a deal and everything. Where I disagreed with you is that I think that you prefer a deal, and I don't think you can make a deal with jihadists no matter what, and that any deal is you've already lost when you make a deal with them. But here's the interesting thing about this weekend, and I noticed a shift in Israel's mood, in Israelis' mood, not the whole of Israel. And that was, at first, there were a couple of things. First of all, there was a ceasefire, a 10-day ceasefire began with Lebanon, and President Trump posted on Truth Social something that raised a lot of eyebrows because of its testy tone. The USA will get all nuclear dust created by our great B-2 bombers. No money will exchange hands in any way, shape, or form. This deal is in no way subject to Lebanon either, but the USA separately will work with Lebanon and deal with the Hezbollah situation in an appropriate manner. Israel will not be bombing Lebanon any longer. They are prohibited from doing so by the USA. Enough is enough. Now, when he says in all capital letters, Israel is prohibited from bombing in Lebanon and, enough is enough. Now, first of all, what's surprising about that is that according to the ceasefire deal with Lebanon, Israel is allowed to and must not only attack when attacked by Hezbollah, but if we see any imminent threats or even plans for some kind of Hezbollah movement, Israel has the right to attack, and that's what we've been doing. Now, interestingly, so that tweet, that I wouldn't call it a tweet because it's on Truth Social, but okay, his posts were all over the place. He said, Iran has agreed to, we're going to go in together and take out the nuclear dust. Then he said, the Strait of Hormuz are open, it's closed, we have the blockade, we don't have Iran has agreed, there's going to be a deal. And then over the course of the weekend, there were Iranian officials. Now, we don't know who's leading the show and who's running the show there because the regime is in tatters. But leaders were saying, no, we're not giving up our nukes, and we're not giving up the nuclear dust, and we're not giving up our right to enrich uranium. And then not only that, we're closing the Strait of Hormuz again. And then to top that all off, Iran fired on 2 Indian boats that had gotten permission to go through the Strait of Hormuz. So here's what I would say. Now, Trump does not like being played for a fool. So I think by the end of the weekend, more Israelis who had said, it seems like the war is over. Now Israelis are saying it seems like by our Independence Day on Wednesday, there's going to be a resumption of the war. But to, let's say, add weight to that belief was another post by President Trump saying, whether people like Israel or not, they have proven to be a great ally of the United States of America. They are courageous, bold, loyal, and smart. And unlike others that have shown their true colors in a moment of conflict and stress, Israel fights hard and knows how to win. He also posted a little clip of from Iran where it says, President Trump, please help us. So here's the thing. I believe that we're headed back to war again this week.
So I said before, I think that's a distinct possibility. I just think it's not necessarily, as I said, it won't necessarily be more of the same. I said, expect a surprise. I want to take issue with the president, and I thought the way he spoke or wrote in the first Truth social posting of his, where he talked about Israel is prohibited and enough is enough. I know that I don't expect Trump to be polite. That's not Trump's way. Trump is very genuine. He tells you what he thinks at the time, and there aren't a lot of filters. But he was talking to an ally. He's been talking to a close friend. He's talking to a country that has supplied the United States with valuable intelligence. He's speaking to a country that's put his soldiers on the line to fight and to die to help win this war. He's talking to a country that is a very strong ally, not just in words, but in deeds. And I would say to the president that I found his remarks that you are prohibited. Now, he can have a tough conversation with Netanyahu. He can tell Netanyahu, you have to stop. Now I'm trying to get a bigger issue. But publicly, I found that language to be over the top, and I didn't like it. And I think most Israelis didn't like it. It also gave Netanyahu's political enemies, it gave them forage. They could say, look, he's just a puppet in the hands of, he's not independent. The same people in Israel who got upset with Netanyahu for standing up to Biden were suddenly calling him now a chump. Yes, Netanyahu's a chump because he just does what Trump ever wants. Now, first of all, I think in the current circumstances, the Israeli prime minister should go everything he can to keep the American president happy. Yes, I think that's a strategic plus because we're the big fighters against Iran and the nuclear issue and so forth. You've got to prioritize, as we've said in the past on this podcast. And I think, though Trump never would publicly admit to a mistake, the fact that he made that second tweet last night, yes, where he said Israel is a great ally and a friend, and those people who don't like Israel should know that, and then he, all our qualities, yes? And the Israelis are fighting and they want to win this and they're, a good ally and all that. That's Trump's way of walking it back. He doesn't say, apologize for spitting in your face. Maybe that's too strong for Mark Regev, but, he doesn't. But the next day said something nice about you and then all is forgotten, yes? Now, the truth is, I just heard what Kamala Harris said, yes, about Israel. And we are so lucky, yes, that from an Israeli perspective, that Trump is in the White House and not Kamala Harris, because the way she's been talking since, maybe it's the realities of Democratic Party politics and to win a Democratic primary today. But what she's saying today is just very, very difficult for Israelis. And once again, with President Trump, with his faults, we'd say in where I grew up in Australia, I don't know if you have an equivalent something in where you grew up in New York, yes? We say warts and all, yes? Trump, in taking on the Iranian nuclear program the way he has, in the support he's given for Israel, it's just an amazing breath of fresh air. And I think when Prime Minister Netanyahu says that we've never had such a good friend in the White House, yes, I think that's a true truth. And I think many people in Israel who are not necessarily Netanyahu supporters would also agree. We've never had such a good friend in the White House. I just wish that all his remarks would always reflect that.
Oh, absolutely. By the way, as for Kamala Harris, first of all, she's a moron and a disgrace, and she always has been. It's not just thankfully she's not in the White House. She has been anti-Israel from the get-go. She boycotted Netanyahu when he went to Washington. Clearly she would have been a disaster as president. If she is planning on running again, you know what? I hope so, because if she is, any Republican should be able to beat her. But that's that's an aside. What you mentioned about Netanyahu's foes being all gleeful, you know how many people, somebody wrote to me and said, ha ha, you see, I told you that Trump just cares about himself, not the world, not about Israel, not about the war. And I was interviewed by somebody who said, oh, what do you say now with your good friend Trump in the White House? This is the tone, okay? Your good friend is turning on you. Now, here's the thing. Either you are an American or an Israeli, or you're in the West and you support defeating jihadist global jihad, and you support defeating the evil regime in Tehran, or you don't. And if you do, then what is the point of saying, ha ha, things are going badly? Don't you care about Western civilization? Don't you care about your own country, whether you're Israeli or American or, oh, well, I won't even talk about Europe because, as far as I'm concerned, the way Europe has been behaving, I mean, mainly Western Europe, that's also a disgrace and a shame. But as I said, this gleeful, oh, look, he's turning against you. Why should that make anybody happy when we are right now at a crossroads in the Middle East and in the world? I think that is really disgusting. What can I say?
Can I respond by saying, right, Israel and the United States are very close allies, and the Prime Minister and the President have a very good personal relationship. They have a mutual respect, that's clear. But to presume that they'd never disagree about anything is, of course, absurd. I mean, married couples who love each other very, very much and live together for 30 years just disagree about issues. And the idea that two countries wouldn't, even the closest of allies wouldn't have differences is ridiculous. I mean, anyone who's read their history, the great World War II allies, Roosevelt and Churchill, they had huge arguments, right? And Thatcher and Reagan, huge arguments, right? So the idea, it's just ridiculous. Of course, they're going to have areas where they agree and disagree, and that's par for the course. And to expect anything else is to expect the, expect the irrational. Yes, it's not going to happen. Having said that, I do think, once again, when you have these disagreements, when Roosevelt and Churchill had huge arguments, it was behind the scenes. It was largely behind the scenes. It wasn't something that you didn't want to give Hitler solace, right, by having the two leaders of the Western Alliance having a public fight. And I think, though, we have to accept Trump for what he is. Having said all that, on the merits of it, Trump wanted us to cease fire in Lebanon, and maybe he thought he had to send a very tough and stark message to the Israelis, shock therapy to the Israelis. Maybe that's how he saw it. And ceasing fire in Lebanon is a difficult decision for the Israelis. And I think that basically, if I heard Netanyahu correctly, we did it because the Americans asked us to do, and the Iranian story is the central story, and we're willing, Lenin, the leader of the Bolshevik revolution in Russia, famously said, one step backwards, two steps forward, right? We're taking a time out on Lebanon. We're going to stop this. There's a possibility of negotiations with the Lebanese president. We'll see what happens. That's a whole different story. But we can do a pause there, keep our eye on the ball. The big ball is Tehran, not the game going on or what's going on in Beirut. And so maybe that's, I think Netanyahu made the right decision. And I would say our situation in Lebanon, even with the current pause, once again, Israeli troops on the ground all across South Lebanon, where we weren't before this started, right? Where can control the area we're currently controlling. There's no demand as part of the ceasefire that Israel has to pull back. Though that was one of Hezbollah's demands. No, we don't pull back. We control the area where we are, which means we can continue taking out Hezbollah infrastructure. Like before this ceasefire, we can be proactive. And if we see a threat to our forces, if we see Hezbollah doing something they shouldn't do, we can take out, as we already have been doing. And I think what's going on with Lebanon politically is also very interesting, because since we started talking this week and our previous podcast, there's been this beginning of formal talks between Israel and Lebanon. Now, I'm very realistic about these talks because the Lebanese government is weak, yes, and their ability to make a deal with Israel and just, disarm Hezbollah is problematic. It's very limited. But we're starting a dynamic through these talks with Lebanon, which is definitely a positive dynamic. And who knows where it's going to lead.
Okay, no, that's true. Although, again, Lebanon really isn't a sovereign country. Hezbollah controls everything there. Obviously, it would be a great development if somehow together Israel and Lebanon defeat Hezbollah. I'll believe it when I see it, etc. But, and again, Israel reserved the right, and it's according to the agreement, to do what it needs to do to protect its borders, and that's fine. To take a pause because Iran really is the bigger issue. But I'd like to say, it's very hard to compare these things to previous governments, especially not in World War II. And the reason is we have social media. In previous generations, when you said that there couldn't be things aired in public, even if there was a public statement, it would take 24 hours for a newspaper to come out and be printed, right? Here we have everything in real time on Twitter, on Truth Social, and you can have the Ayatollahs tweeting comments, and you have and also Trump loves he's just on his phone all the time commenting. So you can't compare those things. Everything is out in public. Now, the difference between Netanyahu and Trump is that Trump has just got his thumbs on his phone, and he's the one writing those posts. We know that because of the mistakes that are in them. It's not like his PR office is doing it and editing it. He just vomits out what he wants to say at a given moment. Whereas Netanyahu is a different story, not sure that he even knows how to personally tweet something. He's got a staff to do it. He's careful about his words. He's extremely articulate and eloquent and certainly doesn't make grammatical errors, not in English and not in Hebrew. There are different kettles of fish. But what is lucky about this, it's problematic with this, open, a free-for-all on social media. The advantage of it is that we get to see what leaders are thinking at a given moment, and especially at this moment, because the Iranian foreign ministry spokesman and the speaker of the Iranian parliament, because of their going on social media, we know that they're saying no to Trump when he said they're saying yes. That's lucky. We get to see what they actually are saying, and I'm for that.
So I would just say the following, that in the past, let's say Roosevelt was having a fight with Churchill. He could always, have a background conversation. What was he called? There was a guy called Reston, who was then the big columnist of the New York Times, and a background conversation. And he would write a column saying, the White House is upset with the British. Yes, social media makes it all much more immediate and in your face. But if you were having a fight with one of your allies and you wanted to send a message that, it used to be done in the old days too, maybe the timing, it was all a little bit. Yeah,
took a long time.
For the next day's newspaper or radio broadcast on CBS or something, yes. I want to now talk about, we're recording today's podcast on a Sunday because Wednesday's a holiday in Israel. It's Independence Day, and hopefully we'll all be having fun.
And Tuesday.
Yeah, it's Remembrance
Memorial Day for fallen soldiers and victims of terrorism.
Correct.
Extreme. It's always apt in this country. This year, it takes on even greater meaning.
Correct. I just wanted to say, yes, as we enter Israel's now 79th year, right? I think with all the problems we have and all the challenges, right, there's a lot that the glass is only half full, yes? The Iranian regime is still there, and Hamas still controls large part of Gaza, though we control the majority of Gaza. And Hezbollah, though it's been greatly weakened, like Hamas, is still there, right? We have still threats out there, right? But it's important not to forget the half glass that's full, right? And Netanyahu said we haven't achieved all our objectives. We will still achieve them either one way or another, like Trump. Yes, either we'll do it militarily or diplomatically. But the fact that we have a huge Israeli buffer zone in Gaza, which means Hamas's terrorist thugs are not right on the border looking eyeball to eyeball with the Israeli civilian communities. And it's the same in Lebanon because the Israeli soldiers are still there in southern Lebanon. Hezbollah thugs are not right on the border as they were, right? In Syria, we've got this now buffer zone where the IDF has been for a couple of months already. And with Iran, right? In the worst case scenario, right, there's no deal of taking out the Iranian. We have nevertheless still substantially defanged the Iranian monster. And so I think on this Remembrance Day and on Independence Day, first of all, we thank all those young Israeli men and women who gave their lives for the freedom of this country, right? And at the same time, I think we can say, listen, every life that was lost since October 7, 2023, and too many lives have been lost, yes? But to say that those lives, they have paved the path to this superior strategic situation that Israel is in today. We are stronger, we are safer, we are more secure than we were this time 3 years ago.
There's no question about that. And even surprisingly, the shekel is so strong that soon the Bank of Israel is going to have to intervene. It's within a year, it could have parity with the dollar. I mean, the stock market is booming. It's actually mysterious, but there you have it. And I'll tell you something else, which you mentioned about we're in a better situation. 3 years ago, even less than 3 years ago, if someone had told you that our planes, not just U.S. planes, but I mean, Israeli planes could be flying back and forth over Tehran without getting downed, with the pilots coming back safely, you would have said that person was insane. Iran was the big bad bogeyman. And look at what we exposed and what we did. It's so crucial. As you said, even if that's all we achieve, it will have been a lot. The only thing that worries me, and I hope it doesn't happen, is that we're so close, and that again, if we listen to the propaganda or the West says, they do want to make a deal or something, that we end up having to, I say, backtrack in a way and forget that you cannot believe a word they say and you cannot make deals with them. You really have to replace the word deal with the word defeat.
So I will repeat what I've said on the previous podcast, Ruthie. I also would like to see many things better, yes? I'd like to see the fall of the Iranian regime and have a good relationship with Tehran like we used to have under the Shah. And I'd like to see Hamas totally thrown out of Gaza. I'd like to see Hezbollah totally thrown out of Lebanon and to have a peace treaty with them and so forth and so on. Having said all that, I have to be realistic and I have to say, well, don't let the perfect stand in the way of the possible and the good, right? And if you just think of it, that 3 years ago, the Iranians had this strategy. They were well on their way to a nuclear weapon. Not that Mark Regev says so. The IAEA said so. The UN said so, right? They were closer than ever before to having enough fissile material for a bomb. And at the same time, they were building this proxy armies, terror armies on Israel's border, Hamas in the south, the Houthis in Yemen, Hezbollah in Lebanon. I remember sitting in government meetings when I was in government all those years ago, yes? And they could launch literally tens of thousands of missiles on all parts of Israel, and we'd have mass casualties, right? And now they can still, as we saw just last week, they can still shoot missiles at Israel, but it's a fraction of what they used to be able to do because of all of it we've done to defang the various monsters. And I think with that, once again, it's important, especially as we come to Remembrance Day and Independence Day, remember what has been achieved. There's still things that need to be done, but remember what we have achieved. And I always said, if you look back, and if you look where Israel was 78 years ago when Ben-Gurion declares the State of Israel in 1948, and you look to where we are today, then there was an existential threat to the very existence of the State of Israel. The Americans told Ben-Gurion, listen, Marshall told Sharet, who was then called Chertok, in a Washington meeting like 2 weeks before independence is declared, he said, listen, guys, you might not win this, and we're not sending American troops to help you, right? If you declare independence, you're in this on your own. And, he received analysis from the Pentagon and from the CIA. The Arabs outnumber Israel. The Arabs outgun Israel. They're not for sure going to succeed. He was giving frank advice saying, don't do it. You might not win this war, and we're not going to come and save your bacon, right? Ben-Gurion took the step, declared independence, and guess what? We prevailed. And since then, the truth is we are stronger politically, we're stronger demographically, we're stronger economically, we're stronger militarily, we're stronger strategically than ever before. And for that, I think all Israelis can celebrate this year's Independence Day with a smile.
Absolutely. And next time we're here, or next time we get together in the studio, the question is, will we do so and have to run to bomb shelters or not? And we'll see.
We'll see. Good to speak with you, Ruthie.